The church bells were supposed to ring with joy that morning in Tombstone, Arizona territory. Instead, they stayed silent as Catherine Rose stood at the altar in her white dress, waiting for a man who would never come. The year was 1885, and the Dow, small frontier town, was buzzing with excitement about the wedding. Catherine had spent weeks preparing everything. Her dress was the finest white silk that money could buy in those parts. The church was decorated with wild flowers she had picked herself from the desert. Even the preacher had practiced his speech twice to make sure everything would be perfect. But Thomas Whitmore was nowhere to be seen. Catherine stood there holding her bouquet of desert roses, watching the church door. Every minute felt like an hour. The guests began to whisper among themselves. Some looked at her with pity. Others shook their heads in disappointment. A few seemed almost pleased that another scandal was unfolding in their quiet town. "Maybe he's just late," her Aunt Martha whispered, trying to sound hopeful. But even she didn't believe her own words. Catherine knew better. Deep down in her heart, she knew Thomas wasn't coming. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened to her. In fact, it was the third time in 5 years that a man had promised to marry her, only to disappear at the last moment. The first time was when she was 21. His name was William, and he was a banker's son from back east. They had planned a beautiful spring wedding, but a week before the ceremony, he sent a letter saying he had decided to marry someone else. Someone younger, he said. Someone more suitable for a man of his position. The second time was 2 years later. Robert was a cattle rancher who seemed to genuinely care for her. He was kind and gentle, and Catherine thought she had finally found her match. But on their wedding day, Robert simply vanished. No explanation, no goodbye, no letter, just gone like dust in the wind. And now Thomas had done the same thing. Catherine was 26 years old, which made her practically an old maid by frontier standards. Most women her age were already married with several children. But Catherine was different. She was educated, having gone to school back east before her father died. She could read and write better than most men in town. She knew about business and money, and she ran her late father's ranch all by herself. Perhaps that was the problem. Perhaps she was too independent, too strong, too smart for the men who came courting. They seemed interested at first, drawn by her beauty and her father's land. But once they got to know her, once they realized she had her own opinions and wouldn't just follow orders like a faithful dog, they always found excuses to leave. The whispers in the church grew louder. Catherine could hear fragments of conversations drifting toward her like smoke. "Poor girl, not again. Third time, can you believe it? There must be something wrong with her. Maybe she's cursed. No man wants a woman who thinks she knows better than him." Each word cut through Catherine like a knife. She had worked so hard to be respectable, to be worthy of love and marriage. She had learned to cook and sew and run a household. She had been patient and kind with her suitors. She had tried to be everything a frontier woman was supposed to, but it was never enough. After an hour of waiting, the preacher finally cleared his throat. "I think we should accept that Mr. Whitmore is not coming," he said gently. "Perhaps we should all go home." The guests began to file out of the church, some patting Catherine on the shoulder with awkward sympathy. Others just avoided looking at her altogether. Soon the church was empty except for Catherine and her Aunt Martha. "Come home with me, dear," Martha said softly. "We'll have some tea and forget about all this nonsense." But Catherine couldn't forget. Not this time. The pain and humiliation were too much to bear. She needed to get away, to be alone, to scream out all the hurt and anger that had been building up inside her for years. "I need to go for a ride," she said, surprising her aunt. "In your wedding dress? Catherine, be reasonable." "I don't want to be reasonable anymore," Catherine replied. And there was something in her voice that made Martha step back. "I've been reasonable my whole life, and look where it's gotten me." Catherine walked out of the church with her head held high, even though inside she felt like she was dying. She went to the stable behind the church where her horse, a beautiful mare named Star, was waiting. Star had been saddled and ready to carry Catherine and her new husband to their reception. Instead, she would carry Catherine away from the scene of her latest heartbreak. Catherine climbed onto Star's back, not caring that her white dress would be ruined. She rode out of town as fast as she could, her veil streaming behind her like a banner of surrender. People stopped what they were doing to stare as she passed. Children pointed and whispered. Dogs barked at the strange sight of a bride racing through the dusty streets alone. She rode toward the desert, toward the red rocks, an endless sky that had always been her refuge when life became too much to handle. The sun was hot on her face, and the wind whipped her hair loose from its careful arrangement. Her dress was already getting dirty and torn, but she didn't care. Nothing mattered anymore except getting as far away as possible from the pitying looks and cruel whispers. Catherine rode for miles until she reached her favorite spot, a high cliff overlooking a deep canyon. This was where she came when she needed to think, when the loneliness became too heavy to carry. The view from up there was breathtaking. Red rocks stretched out as far as the eye could see, painted in shades of orange and gold by the afternoon sun. She dismounted and walked to the edge of the cliff. Her wedding dress was now stained with dust and sweat, the beautiful white silk ruined beyond repair. But somehow that felt appropriate. Her dreams of marriage and love were just as ruined. Catherine looked out at the vast wilderness and felt the full weight of her loneliness crash over her like a wave. All her life she had believed that someday, somewhere, there would be a man who would see her worth, a man who would appreciate her intelligence and independence instead of feeling threatened by it, a man who would claim her as his own and never let her go. But maybe she had been fooling herself. Maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with her that made men run away. Maybe she was destined to spend her life alone, growing old and bitter on her father's ranch, watching other women find happiness while she remained unwanted and unloved. The tears came then, hot and bitter. She had held them back during the long wait at the altar, during the humiliating exit from the church, during the wild ride into the desert. But now, alone with only the rocks and sky as witnesses, she let them fall freely. "What's wrong with me?" she cried out to the empty canyon. Her voice echoed off the rocks, coming back to her in broken fragments. "Why doesn't anyone want me? I've tried so hard to be good enough, to be worthy of love. But no man has ever claimed me, not one." She sank to her knees on the dusty ground, her ruined wedding dress spreading around her like the petals of a wilted flower. The tears came harder now, years of rejection and disappointment pouring out of her all at once. "I'm 26 years old and completely alone," she sobbed. "Maybe I should just accept that I'm meant to be by myself forever. Maybe I should stop hoping that someone will ever want to build a life with me." Her voice grew louder, more desperate, as if she were arguing with the desert itself. "But I have so much love to give. I could make a man happy, I know I could. I could be a good wife, a good partner. I'm not asking for much, just someone who sees me as worth keeping." The sun was starting to set, painting the canyon walls in deep shades of red and purple. Catherine had never felt so small or so lost. All her education, all her independence, all her strength meant nothing if she was going to spend her life alone. She closed her eyes and let out one final, desperate cry that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. "No man has ever claimed me. What's wrong with me that no one wants to build a life with me?" The words echoed and re-echoed through the canyon, bouncing off the rocks and fading into the distance. For a moment there was only silence. Catherine felt completely and utterly alone in the world, but she wasn't alone. From somewhere behind her came the soft sound of footsteps on stone. Catherine's eyes snapped open, and she spun around, suddenly aware that she was vulnerable and far from help. Her heart pounded as she saw a figure emerging from the shadows between the rocks. It was a man, tall and strong, with dark skin and long black hair. He moved with the quiet grace of someone who belonged in this wild place. His clothes were simple leather and cloth, and he carried himself with a dignity that made Catherine forget to be afraid. This was not like any man she had ever met. There was something in his dark eyes that made her breath catch in her throat. Not pity like she was used to seeing, not contempt or indifference, something else entirely. Something that made her feel, for the first time in her life, truly seen. The stranger looked at her for a long moment, taking in her tear-stained face and ruined wedding dress. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep and calm, with an accent she couldn't quite place. "Then I'll claim you enough for every man who didn't." Catherine stared at him in shock. These were not the words she had expected to hear from a stranger, and the stranger's words hung in the air between them like something magical. Catherine couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She just stared at this man who had appeared out of nowhere and said the most incredible thing anyone had ever said to her. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. The man stepped closer, moving with the quiet confidence of someone completely at home in the wilderness. Catherine could see him more clearly now. He was Apache, she realized, one of the native people who lived in these mountains. His face was strong and weathered by sun and wind, with high cheekbones and eyes so dark they seemed to hold secrets. There were silver ornaments braided into his long black hair, and a necklace of turquoise stones rested against his chest. "My name is Kai," he said simply. "And I know who you are, Catherine Mackenzie." Catherine's heart skipped at hearing her name. "You know me?" Kai nodded slowly. "You run the Mackenzie Ranch south of town. You trade fairly with my people when others will not. You pay honest prices for our horses and give food to Apache families when the hunting is poor. Yes, I know you." Catherine was amazed. She had indeed traded with Apache bands over the years, despite the disapproval of many townspeople. It was good business, and more importantly, it was the right thing to do. But she had no idea that anyone among them had taken special notice of her. "I was tracking horse thieves when I heard your cry," Kai continued. "White men took ponies from my band 3 days ago. Their trail led me here." He paused, studying her face in the fading light. "But when I heard your words, I forgot about the thieves. No one should feel such pain." Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. How much had he heard of her desperate outburst? How foolish she must have sounded, sobbing about her loneliness to the empty desert. "I must sound pathetic to you," she said, trying to gather what remained of her dignity. "No," Kai said firmly. "You sound like someone who has been told lies about her worth." Catherine blinked in surprise. This was not what she had expected him to say. Kai moved to sit on a flat rock near where Catherine knelt in the dust. He was careful to maintain a respectful distance, but close enough that they could speak without raising their voices. "Among my people," he said, "a woman's value is not measured by whether a man chooses her. It is measured by her spirit, her wisdom, her contributions to the tribe. A woman who can run a ranch alone, who can read and write and make fair trades with strangers, who shows kindness to people others fear. Such a woman is precious beyond measure." Catherine stared at him, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had ever suggested that her independence and education were strengths rather than flaws. "But I've been rejected 3 times, she said quietly. "There must be something wrong with me." Kai was quiet for a moment, watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "A horse trader once brought me a magnificent stallion," he said. "Strong, fast, intelligent. But the horse was too spirited for most riders. Many men tried to break him and failed. They said the horse was worthless because he would not submit." Catherine listened, wondering where this story was going. "But the horse was not worthless," Kai continued. "He simply needed a rider who understood his strength instead of fearing it. When the right person came along, that horse became the finest mount anyone had ever seen." Catherine felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening that had been locked for years. "Are you saying I'm like a spirited horse?" she asked, and for the first time that day, there was a hint of humor in her voice. Kai smiled then, and his whole face transformed. The stern expression softened into something warm and almost playful. "I am saying that you are magnificent," he said simply, "and the men who ran from you were too weak to appreciate what they were being offered." Catherine felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the bitter tears she had shed earlier. These felt like relief, like cool water after a long drought. "I don't understand," she said. "You don't even know me." I know enough, Kai replied. I have watched you from a distance. I have seen how you treat your workers with fairness, how you care for your animals, how you keep your word in business dealings. I have seen you ride alone across dangerous country without fear. I have seen you stand up to men twice your size when they tried to cheat you. Catherine's mouth fell open. You've been watching me? Not watching like a hunter watches prey, Kai said quickly, seeming to understand her concern. Observing as one observes the seasons changing or the flight of birds. You interested me. Interested you how? Kai was quiet for a moment, and Catherine saw something almost shy cross his features. You are different from other white women I have seen, he said finally. Most are afraid of this land, afraid of my people, afraid of anything that is not familiar to them. But you embrace the desert. You ride through it like you belong here. And you treat Apache as people, not as threats to be eliminated or problems to be solved. Catherine realized she was holding her breath. Never in her life had anyone spoken to her with such attention, such respect. The men who had courted her had talked about her father's land, her ability to cook and clean, her potential as a mother, for their children. But none had ever really seen her as a person with her own worth. Where did you learn to speak English so well? She asked. Mission school when I was young, Kai said. The priests wanted to make me into a white man. They failed, but I kept the language. It has proven useful. The sun had set while they talked, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Catherine realized she had been sitting in the dirt for hours, but somehow she didn't want this conversation to end. I should get back to town, she said reluctantly. People will worry. Will they? Kai asked, and there was something in his tone that made Catherine look at him sharply. She thought about it honestly. Would anyone really worry about her? Her Aunt Martha might, but she was probably already telling everyone that Catherine was having a fit of hysteria and would come home when she was ready. Most of the townspeople would assume she had gone somewhere to nurse her wounded pride. Some might even be hoping she would stay away permanently, taking her scandalous reputation with her. Maybe not, she admitted. Kai reached into a leather pouch at his side and pulled out a water skin. He offered it to Catherine without a word. She accepted it gratefully, realizing how thirsty she had become. The water was cool and sweet, better than anything she had ever tasted. As she drank, she became aware of how she must look. Wedding dress torn and dirty, hair a tangled mess, face streaked with tears and dust. I must look terrible, she said, suddenly self-conscious. You look like a woman who has been through a battle, Kai said. There is honor in that. Catherine found herself smiling despite everything. This man had a way of turning her worst moments into something that sounded almost admirable. What will happen to you now? Kai asked gently. Catherine sighed. It was a question she had been avoiding all day. I don't know, she said honestly. Go back to my ranch, I suppose. Try to forget this ever happened. Maybe the gossips will find someone else to talk about eventually. And marriage? Will you try again? The question hit Catherine like a physical blow. The thought of going through another courtship, another engagement, another potential humiliation made her feel sick. No, she said firmly. I'm done with that. I'd rather spend my life alone than go through this again. Kai nodded as if he understood completely. Loneliness is not the worst fate, he said. I have been alone for many years. Catherine looked at him with surprise. You've never married? I was married once when I was young, Kai said quietly. She died of fever 3 winters ago. Since then I have not found anyone who interested me. There was something in the way he said those last words that made Catherine's heart flutter, strangely. She told herself she was imagining things. This Apache warrior couldn't possibly be implying what she thought he was implying. But when she looked into his dark eyes, she saw something there that took her breath away. Something that looked almost like longing. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars grew brighter overhead. Catherine realized that for the first time in years, she felt completely at peace. Not happy, exactly. The pain of the day's humiliation was still too fresh for that. But calm in a way she couldn't remember feeling since childhood. I should go, she said finally, though she made no move to stand up. Yes, Kai agreed, but he didn't move either. Thank you, Catherine said softly. For what you said. For making me feel like maybe I'm not broken after all. You were never broken, Kai said with quiet intensity. You were always exactly what you were meant to be. Catherine felt her heart do something strange and fluttery. She stood up slowly, brushing dust from her ruined dress. Star had wandered a short distance away to graze on the sparse desert grass but came trotting back when Catherine whistled. As she prepared to mount her horse, Kai stood as well. Catherine, he said, and her name sounded different in his voice than it had in anyone else's. Richer somehow, more meaningful. She turned to look at him. 3 days had passed since Catherine's disastrous wedding day, and she couldn't stop thinking about Kai. Every time she tried to focus on ranch work or household chores, his words would echo in her mind. Then I'll claim you enough for every man who didn't. No one in town had said anything directly to her face about the failed wedding, but she could feel their stares and whispers following her wherever she went. The general store clerk avoided eye contact. Women she had known for years suddenly found urgent business elsewhere when they saw her coming. Even the preacher had given her an awkward pat on the shoulder and mumbled something about God's mysterious plans. But somehow, their pity and judgment didn't sting as much as it should have. Kai's words had planted something inside her, a small seed of self-worth that was slowly beginning to grow. On the 4th morning, Catherine found herself saddling Star before dawn. She told herself she was just going for a ride to clear her head, nothing more. But her horse seemed to know exactly where they were going, heading straight for the canyon where she had met Kai. She reached the cliff just as the sun was painting the red rocks gold and orange. The desert looked magical in the early morning, light, vast and beautiful and completely untamed. Catherine dismounted and walked to the edge, breathing in the clean, dry air. She wasn't really expecting to see Kai again. Their meeting had been a chance encounter, nothing more. But as she stood there watching the sunrise, she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. You came back, Kai's voice said quietly. Catherine turned, her heart doing that strange fluttery thing again. He was there, real as life, holding the reins of a beautiful paint horse she hadn't noticed the last time. I needed to think, she said, trying to sound casual. This is a good place for thinking. Kai nodded, understanding without needing explanation. He moved to stand beside her, not too close but near enough that she could catch the scent of leather and sage that seemed to surround him. Did you find what you were looking for? He asked. Catherine considered the question. I'm not sure what I was looking for, she admitted. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher. Catherine found herself stealing glances at Kai, noting details she had missed in the dim light of their first meeting. The strong line of his jaw, the way his long hair moved in the morning breeze, the silver bracelet on his wrist that caught the light when he moved. Tell me about your people, she said suddenly. Kai looked at her with surprise. Why do you want to know? Because you know so much about mine, and I know almost nothing about yours. That doesn't seem fair. A slow smile spread across Kai's face. Fair, he repeated. Yes, you would think about fairness. He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. My band moves with the seasons, he began. In summer we live in the high mountains where it is cool and the hunting is good. In winter we come down to the desert where the wind is not so bitter. We follow the old ways as much as we can, but the world is changing around us. It must be difficult, Catherine said softly. Everything worthwhile is difficult, Kai replied. But we adapt. We survive. What's your role in the band? I am a scout and hunter. I find game, watch for enemies, learn the movements of the cavalry and settlers. It is my job to keep my people safe. Catherine thought about what that must mean. The constant vigilance, the responsibility for others' lives, the danger. No wonder he moved with such quiet confidence. He had to. It sounds lonely, she said. Sometimes, Kai admitted. But everyone makes sacrifices for the good of the tribe. Catherine understood about sacrifices. She had sacrificed her own desires many times, trying to fit into the mold of what others expected her to be. As the morning wore on, their conversation flowed easily from topic to topic. Kai told her about Apache customs and beliefs, about the connection his people felt to the land and all living things. Catherine shared stories about running her ranch, about the challenges of being a woman in business in a man's world. "Your father taught you well," Kai observed when Catherine described some of her more successful cattle deals. "My father taught me everything he would have taught a son," Catherine said. "I think he always secretly wished I had been born a boy." "That would have been a great loss," Kai said, and there was something in his voice that made Catherine's cheeks warm. When the sun reached its peak, Kai disappeared for a few minutes and returned with 2 rabbits he had caught and cleaned. Without asking, he built a small fire and began roasting them over the flames. "I can't let you feed me," Catherine protested. "It wouldn't be proper." Kai gave her a look that was both amused and patient. "Proper according to whom?" Catherine opened her mouth to answer, then realized she didn't have a good response. "Proper according to the same people who had whispered about her behind their hands for the past 4 days. The same people who valued her only for what she could do for a man. I suppose it would be rude to refuse," she said finally. The rabbit was the most delicious thing Catherine had ever tasted. They ate in companionable silence, watching hawks circle overhead and listening to the wind whistle through the canyon. "I should go," Catherine said reluctantly when they finished eating. "I have work to do at the ranch." But she made no move to leave, and Kai made no move to hurry her along. "Will you come back?" he asked quietly. Catherine looked into his dark eyes and saw hope there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. "Would you want me to?" "More than I should," Kai admitted. Catherine's breath caught. There it was again, that hint of something deeper than friendship in his words. "I don't understand what's happening here," she said softly. "Neither do I," Kai replied. "But perhaps understanding is not always necessary." Catherine nodded slowly. She was a practical woman who liked to have plans and understand consequences. But sitting here with Kai, feeling more alive and valued than she had in years, maybe it was time to stop overthinking everything. "Tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow," Kai confirmed. The next morning, Catherine was back at the canyon before sunrise, and the morning after that, and the one after that. What had started as a chance encounter was becoming something she looked forward to more than anything else in her life. Each day brought new revelations. Kai taught her things about the desert she had never known, despite living there all her life. He showed her which plants could be eaten, which ones had healing properties, how to read animal tracks and weather signs. He told her stories of Apache heroes and legends that stretched back hundreds of years. In return, Catherine shared her own knowledge. She told him about books she had read, places she had visited back east before her father died, her dreams of traveling to see the ocean someday. She described the business side of ranching, the politics of the territory, the changing world that was coming whether anyone wanted it or not. "You have seen much of the world," Kai observed one morning as Catherine described a trip to San Francisco she had taken with her father years earlier. "Not as much as I'd like," Catherine replied. "Most women aren't expected to travel alone." "Expected by whom?" Kai asked, and Catherine was beginning to recognize that patient tone he used when he was making a point. "By society. By men who think women need protection." "Do you need protection?" Catherine thought about it honestly. She ran a successful ranch by herself. She could shoot a rifle as well as any man. She had negotiated business deals with some of the shrewdest cattle buyers in the territory. "Not the kind they're talking about," she admitted. "Then perhaps their expectations are not worth considering." It was such a simple statement, but it hit Catherine like a revelation. All her life, she had been trying to meet other people's expectations, to fit into boxes others had created for her. But what if those boxes were too small? What if she was never meant to fit into them at all? As the days passed, Catherine found herself changing in subtle ways. She stood straighter, spoke more confidently, made decisions without second-guessing. Herself. The ranch hands noticed the difference and began treating her with more respect. Even some of the townspeople seemed to view her differently, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what had changed. The truth was, she was finally beginning to see herself through Kai's eyes, as someone valuable and capable and worth knowing. It was transforming her from the inside out, but their growing friendship wasn't without complications. Catherine had to be careful about when and where she rode out to meet Kai. If the wrong person saw her heading toward Apache territory on a regular basis, there would be questions she couldn't answer. More than once, she had to make excuses for her frequent absences. She told people she was checking on cattle in the far pastures or riding the fence line, or any number of other ranch-related tasks. Most people accepted her explanations without question. After all, running a ranch required a lot of riding around, but her foreman, Pete Rodriguez, was starting to look at her strangely. "You sure spend a lot of time checking the south pasture lately, Miss Catherine," he said one morning as she was saddling Star yet again. "The fence down there needs constant attention," Catherine replied, hoping she sounded casual. "You know how it is." Pete nodded, but she could see the questions in his eyes. Pete had worked for her father for 20 years and knew every inch of the ranch. He would know if there were really problems with the south fence that required daily inspection. 2 weeks had passed since Catherine began meeting Kai at the canyon, and she had never felt more alive. Every morning brought the promise of seeing him again, of learning something new, of feeling valued and understood in ways she had never experienced before. But all good things, Catherine had learned, eventually came to an end. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when she was returning from another meeting with Kai. She had been more careless than usual, so happy and distracted that she hadn't paid attention to her surroundings. As she crested a hill about a mile from her ranch house, she saw dust clouds in the distance, riders approaching fast. Catherine's heart sank when she recognized the blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers. There were 6 of them, led by Captain James Morrison, a man she had been avoiding for months. Morrison had made it clear on several occasions that he was interested in courting her, and he had not taken her polite rejections well. She tried to change direction, hoping to avoid them, but it was too late. Morrison had spotted her and was already spurring his horse toward her. "Miss Mackenzie," he called out, his voice carrying a tone of authority that set Catherine's teeth on edge. "Just the person I was hoping to see." Catherine had no choice but to stop and wait for them to reach her. As they drew closer, she could see that Morrison's face was grim, and the other soldiers looked tense and alert. "Captain Morrison," she said coolly, "what brings you to my ranch?" "Indian trouble," Morrison replied bluntly. "We've had reports of Apache raiders in this area, horse thieves and worse." Catherine's blood turned to ice. Was he talking about Kai? Had someone seen them together? "I haven't seen any raiders," she said carefully. Morrison studied her with sharp blue eyes that had always made Catherine uncomfortable. He was a handsome man in the conventional sense, tall, blonde, well-groomed, but there was something cold and calculating about him that had always put her off. "That's odd," he said slowly. "Because one of my scouts found fresh tracks leading from Apache territory toward your ranch. Multiple times over the past 2 weeks. Catherine fought to keep her expression neutral, but inside she was panicking. How could she have been so careless? Of course the cavalry would have scouts watching the movements between Apache lands and white settlements. "I ride out to check my cattle every day," she said. "Perhaps your scout is seeing my tracks." Morrison's smile was thin and unpleasant. "Perhaps, but Apache ponies leave different hoofprints than ranch horses, Miss Mackenzie. My scout knows the difference." Catherine realized she was in serious trouble. If Morrison suspected she had been meeting with Kai, it wouldn't just mean social ruin. It could mean real danger for both of them. "I don't know what to tell you, Captain," she said, trying to sound bored. "I haven't seen any Apache." "No?" Morrison leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes never leaving her face. "That's interesting because my scout also reported seeing a woman in a white dress riding toward Apache territory on the night of your unfortunate wedding day." Catherine's heart stopped. They had been watching her from the very beginning. I went for a ride that night to clear my head, she said stiffly. I'm sure you can understand why I needed some time alone. Of course, Morrison said smoothly. A woman in your position would naturally be upset, which is why I'm here to offer you a solution. Catherine didn't like the sound of that. What kind of solution? Morrison dismounted and walked closer to her horse. Catherine had to fight, the urge to back away. You're a woman alone on a dangerous frontier, Miss Mackenzie. You've proven that you can't depend on the men of this town to protect you properly. But I can. I don't need protection, Catherine said firmly. Don't you? Morrison's voice turned hard. Because from where I stand, it looks like you're consorting with hostiles. Do you know what happens to white women who collaborate with the enemy? The threat was clear, and Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. In the current climate of fear and suspicion, accusations of collaboration with Apache could destroy a person's life, or worse. I haven't collaborated with anyone, she said. Haven't you? Morrison pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. I have a sworn statement from a settler who claims he saw you talking to an Apache warrior 3 days ago. He says you looked quite friendly. Catherine's mind raced. Who could have seen them? They had been so careful to meet in remote places, far from any settlements or travel routes. That's impossible, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Morrison smiled, sensing her weakness. Perhaps it is. Perhaps my witness is mistaken. Perhaps there's a reasonable explanation for all of this. There is, Catherine said desperately. I'm sure there is. And I'm prepared to accept that explanation, Miss Mackenzie. I'm prepared to forget all about these troubling reports and sworn statements. Catherine knew what was coming next, and she dreaded it. All you have to do, Morrison continued, is accept my proposal of marriage. There it was. The trap she had walked straight into. Catherine stared at Morrison in shock and disgust. You're blackmailing me into marriage? I'm offering you protection, Morrison corrected smoothly. As my wife, you would be above suspicion. No one would dare question the loyalty of a cavalry officer's wife, and I would make sure these unfortunate rumors disappeared completely. And if I refuse? Morrison's expression hardened. Then I would have to do my duty and investigate these reports thoroughly. I would have to question you officially about your possible collaboration with hostiles. Word would spread as it always does. People would begin to wonder about your loyalty, about whether you could be trusted. Your business relationships would suffer. Your social standing would be destroyed. He paused, letting the implications sink in. And of course, he continued, I would have to increase patrols in this area. My men would be watching for any sign of Apache presence if we found any. Well, Apache raiders are considered shoot on sight. Catherine felt sick. Morrison wasn't just threatening her. He was threatening Kai's life. You're despicable, she whispered. Morrison shrugged. I'm practical. You need a husband, Miss Mackenzie. Your recent embarrassments have made that clear. I need a wife who understands the importance of loyalty to the United States Army. We can help each other. Catherine wanted to refuse immediately, to tell Morrison exactly what she thought of his threats and his proposal. But the image of Kai being shot down by cavalry soldiers kept her silent. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, Morrison said graciously, but don't take too long. I'll need an answer by tomorrow evening. After that, my duty as an officer will require me to act on the information I've received. He remounted his horse and tipped his hat to her with mock courtesy. Good day, Miss Mackenzie. I look forward to your decision. Catherine watched the soldiers ride away, her heart pounding and her mind reeling. What was she going to do? Morrison had her trapped completely. If she refused his proposal, he would make good on his threats. Her reputation would be destroyed. Her business would suffer, and worst of all, Kai would be in mortal danger. But if she accepted Morrison's proposal, she would be condemning herself to a loveless marriage with a man she despised. More than that, she would never see Kai again. She would have to give up the one relationship that had ever made her feel truly valued and understood. Catherine rode home in a daze. barely seeing the familiar landscape around her. When she reached her ranch house, she went straight to her father's study and poured herself a glass of whiskey with shaking hands. She had until tomorrow evening to decide between two impossible choices: marry a man she hated to protect the man she was falling in love with, or refuse and watch both their worlds fall apart. That night, Catherine lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind going in circles. By morning, she had made her decision. She would have to see Kai one more time to explain what was happening, to say goodbye. She rode to the canyon with a heavy heart, dreading what she would have to tell him. When she saw him waiting for her as always, her resolve almost crumbled. "You look troubled," Kai said as she dismounted. Catherine couldn't meet his eyes. "We have a problem." She told him everything, about Morrison's threats, about the evidence he claimed to have, about the impossible choice she faced. Kai listened, without interruption, his face growing more serious with each word. When she finished, they sat in silence for a long time. "You should accept his proposal," Kai said finally. Catherine stared at him in shock. "What?" "Morrison is right about one thing. You need protection. If these rumors spread, your life in the white world will be destroyed. And I cannot protect you from that." "But what about us?" Catherine asked desperately. Kai's face was calm, but Catherine could see the pain in his dark eyes. "There was never really an us," he said gently. "We both knew that from the beginning. We are from different worlds, Catherine. Perhaps it is time to accept that." Catherine felt like he had slapped her. "How can you say that? After everything we've shared, everything we've talked about?" "Because I care about you too much to let you destroy your life for something that could never work," Kai said firmly. "You belong in your world, with your ranch and your business and your future. I belong in mine." "You're giving up," Catherine accused, tears starting to flow. "You're just giving up without even trying to find another way." Catherine sat in her parlor 3 days after accepting Morrison's proposal, staring at the legal documents spread across her father's old desk. The marriage contract Morrison had drawn up was thorough and one-sided. Once they married, everything she owned, the ranch, the cattle, the bank accounts her father had left her, would become Morrison's property. She would become Morrison's property too, in every way that mattered. The wedding was planned for the following Sunday. Morrison had wasted no time making arrangements, probably afraid she would change her mind. The whole town was already buzzing with excitement about the event. The spinster who couldn't keep a man was finally getting married to a respected cavalry officer. It was the kind of story people loved to tell. Catherine picked up her pen to sign the contracts, then set it down again. Something inside her rebelled against putting her name on those papers. Once she signed, there would be no going back. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Catherine opened it to find her Aunt Martha standing on the porch, holding a covered basket. "I brought you some of my apple preserves," Martha said, bustling into the house without invitation, "for your new household." Catherine accepted the basket with as much grace as she could muster. Martha meant well, but she was one of those people who seem to thrive on other people's drama. "You must be so excited, dear," Martha continued, settling herself comfortably in the best chair. "Captain Morrison is such a catch, so handsome, so successful. You're very lucky he was willing to overlook your unfortunate history." Catherine gritted her teeth. "Yes, very lucky." "Of course there has been some talk," Martha said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "People wondering why the captain was so eager to marry you so quickly. Some are saying he must have compromising information about you." Catherine's blood ran cold. "What kind of information?" "Oh, you know how people gossip." Martha waved her hand dismissively. "Something about you spending time with Indians. Ridiculous, of course. I told everyone that you've been grieving your broken engagements by riding alone in the desert. Perfectly understandable for a woman of your sensitivity." Catherine realized that Martha, in her own bumbling way, had been trying to protect her reputation. It was more kindness than she had expected from anyone in town. After Martha left, Catherine walked out to her stable to check on Star. The mare nuzzled her affectionately, sensing her distress. "What should I do, girl?" Catherine whispered, stroking Star's neck. "How did I get myself into this mess?" As she stood there in the gathering dusk, Catherine heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Her heart leaped, thinking for a wild moment that it might be Kai, coming to tell her they would find a way to be together after all. But it was Pete Rodriguez, her foreman, looking unusually serious. "Miss Catherine, we need to talk," he said, dismounting from his horse. Catherine's heart sank. Pete had been acting strangely all week, and she had a feeling she was about to find out why. "What is it, Pete?" "I know where you've been going every morning," he said quietly. "I followed you. Yesterday." Catherine felt the world tilt sideways. "Pete, I can explain—" "You don't need to explain nothing to me," Pete interrupted. "I seen how happy you've been these past weeks. Happier than I ever seen you, even before all that wedding business." Catherine stared at him in amazement. She had expected anger, accusations, threats to expose her secret. She hadn't expected understanding. "You followed me?" "Only yesterday," Pete admitted. "I was worried about you riding out alone so much. Wanted to make sure you were safe. And I saw you talking to an Apache brave. I saw the way you looked at each other." Pete paused, choosing his words carefully. "My grandmother was Apache, Miss Catherine. I know that look." Catherine's legs suddenly felt weak. She sat down on a hay bale, overwhelmed by this unexpected revelation. "You're going to tell Morrison," she said dully. "Hell no," Pete said with unusual vehemence. "Morrison's a bastard who's been trying to get his hands on your ranch for years. This whole marriage thing is just another way for him to steal what your father built." Catherine looked up at Pete with surprise. She had always known he was loyal, but she hadn't realized how much he understood about her situation. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. Pete was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "You ever consider that maybe you don't have to choose between two bad options?" he said finally. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe there's a third choice you ain't thought of yet." Catherine frowned. "Like what?" "Like leaving," Pete said simply. "Just packing up and going somewhere else. Somewhere you can start fresh." Catherine shook her head. "I can't leave my father's ranch. It's all I have left of him. Is it worth spending your life married to a man who's blackmailing you?" The question hit Catherine like a physical blow. Was the ranch worth that much? Was any piece of land worth sacrificing her happiness, her freedom, her chance at real love? "Even if I wanted to leave," she said slowly, "Morrison would never let me go. He'd come after me." "Not if you disappeared proper," Pete said. "Not if you went somewhere he'd never think to look." Catherine stared at him. "You're talking about running away." "I'm talking about making a choice for yourself instead of letting other people make choices for you." That night, Catherine couldn't sleep. Pete's words kept running through her mind. Was he right? Did she have a third option she hadn't considered? She thought about Kai, about the way he had looked when he told her goodbye. He had been resigned to their separation, accepting it as inevitable. But what if it wasn't inevitable? What if there was a way for them to be together without putting anyone in danger? By morning, Catherine had made her decision. She spent the day quietly making preparations. She went to the bank and withdrew all her money, telling the banker she needed cash to pay some ranch expenses before the wedding. She packed her most essential belongings in saddlebags, choosing practical clothes over fancy dresses. She wrote a letter to her Aunt Martha, explaining that she had decided she couldn't go through with the marriage and was leaving town. Most importantly, she wrote another letter, one that Pete would deliver to Morrison after she was safely gone. When Pete read the letter, he whistled low under his breath. "You sure about this, Miss Catherine?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Catherine replied. The letter was simple and direct. "Captain Morrison, I cannot and will not marry you. I am leaving Tombstone permanently. Do not attempt to follow me or to retaliate against anyone who helped me. I have sent copies of our conversations about your blackmail threats to the territorial governor and to your commanding officer. If anything happens to me or to any Apache in this area, those letters will be delivered immediately. I hereby deed my ranch to Pete Rodriguez, who has been more loyal to my family than anyone else in this town. The transfer documents are already filed with the Territorial Land Office. Do not underestimate me, Captain. I may be a woman, but I am not helpless. Catherine Mackenzie. It was a bluff mostly. Catherine hadn't actually written to the governor or Morrison's commanding officer, but she was betting that Morrison wouldn't know that and wouldn't want to risk his career to find out. As the sun set on what should have been the evening before her wedding, Catherine saddled Star and rode out of Tombstone for the last time. She had told Pete she was going to California, where a woman could own property and run a business without needing a man's permission. But first, she had one stop to make. Catherine rode through the night, using the stars to navigate to the canyon, where she had first met Kai. She didn't know if he would be there, didn't even know if he was still in the area. But she had to try. As dawn broke over the red rocks, Catherine saw a familiar figure sitting at the edge of the cliff. Her heart soared. "Kai," she called softly. He turned, and the expression of joy and disbelief on his face made her forget every hardship she had endured to get to this moment. "Catherine? What are you doing here? Your wedding is today." "No, it isn't," Catherine said, dismounting and walking toward him. "I'm not marrying Morrison. I'm not marrying anyone I don't choose to marry." Kai stood up, confusion and hope warring in his dark eyes. "I don't understand." Catherine took a deep breath. "I'm leaving Arizona. I'm going to California, where I can start over, where nobody knows me or cares about my past." She paused, suddenly, nervous. I was wondering if you might want to come with me." Kai stared at her in amazement. "You're asking me to leave my people?" "I'm asking you to choose," Catherine said softly. "The same way I had to choose. I can't promise it will be easy. We'll face prejudice and hardship wherever we go, but we'll face them together." Kai was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "My band is planning to move north anyway," he said slowly. "The cavalry presence here has become too dangerous. Perhaps it is time for me to find a new path." Catherine felt hope bloom in her chest. "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering with words, Kai stepped forward and took her hands in his. His touch was gentle but sure, and Catherine felt a rightness in it that she had never felt with any other man. "You came back," he said quietly. "I told you I would claim you enough for every man who didn't," Catherine replied, using his own words, "from that first day." "I meant it." Kai smiled then, the first truly unguarded smile Catherine had ever seen from him. "Then let's go find that new world together."